Business is brisk at the weekly sheep market in Poyntzpass, but on a March night 5 years ago, as the farmers bought and sold around this ring, a terrorist atrocity was taking place on the other side of the road. The LVF attack left 2 dead. Now the men who pulled the triggers that night are demanding early release. Tonight on Insight we ask, what price justice? The road to Poyntzpass begins here in the Maze prison in December 1997, when INLA prisoners took advantage of lapses in security to carry out one of the most daring attacks of the Troubles, the murder of Billy Wright. On the LVF wing that day were 2 Banbridge men, Stephen McLean and Noel McCready, former soldiers who had linked up with Wright's organisation in Portadown. In February 1998, the case against them collapsed, and McLean and McCready left jail with one thing on their minds: revenge. The gang had identified the target, the railway bar. The LVF later claimed it was being used by the IRA. The police said it was a soft touch for hate-filled terrorists bent on murdering Catholics. As the murder plot unfolded, McLean took a neighbour for a driving lesson on the country roads leading to Poyntzpass, the perfect cover for secretly mapping out a getaway route for his killer gang. On the night of March the 3rd, 1998, McLean and McCready headed for Poyntzpass. At the wheel of their car was David Keyes, a petty criminal originally from East Belfast. In the village itself, the Tuesday night livestock market was in full swing, attracting farmers from across the district. Whether by accident or evil design, the LVF was going to hit the railway bar, which is too small to even hold a table during one of its busiest periods. As it happened, there were 8 customers inside. 26-year-old Damien Trainor, a Catholic, and his 34-year-old Protestant friend Philip Allen were standing at the door.
Damien was a mechanic. Remember then he went to the tech to train, he didn't like it, and I says, Damien, you stick it, I says, you'll be able to do it. He was a marvellous mechanic. He loved his work. They were 2 very popular lads, right? They were happy with their jobs, that's all they wanted. And all what Damien wanted was to work and help people. He had been out pulling people in all the lorries, wouldn't have mattered what time, never worried him.
Philip, he was very fond of garage work. And then Philip, he had been down with Damien every Saturday. Well, I needn't say working with him in the garage, trying to help him in things in the garage. You know, that way he just liked doing that. A shovel was a shovel with him, you know, and he helped me and Cecil around, you know, the house a good bit. Well, he'd done a lot of the gardening end for me, and Cecil wanted things built. He'd have built them for him.
McLean and McCready burst into the bar, and yelling at the customers to get down, they opened fire with 2 handguns. Two drinkers were shot and wounded, one as he tried to shield his teenage daughter. And by the time McLean and McCready ran out of bullets, Damien and Philip lay fatally injured.
I can remember my oldest son, Dee, coming down, and he was wrapping the windows in the front of the house the whole way down the street, and then he banged on the front door. And I didn't know what was going on, so he came in, and I opened the door, and he shouted in that Philip and Damien had got shot up in the pub. Well, shot in the pub, or shot in the leg, they were shot in the arm. It was something like that. So I put on my coat and I ran up the street, shouted at Cecil and told him. But whenever I went in through that bar door, it was completely different. Damien, I could see a hole in Damien's head, just above the top of his ears. And Philip, he was cold, and then he was warm, and then he was cold. And Mrs. Daly lives across the street. She's a nurse, and she was attending Philip and there was blood coming out of Philip.
I remember somebody coming to the door and they were looking Sean, and I thought it was an accident. And I remember, I wasn't listening, I remember the fella saying, Damien has been shot. And I walked down, and the fella, he came down with me. And I remember getting into the pub, and Damien was lying on the floor, and Philip was up at the top. The two nurses were with him. And then I remember saying to him, I says, Damien, smell me. He was very cold.
Philip, he kept on saying he was down. And you're just in that much shock. You just don't know what to do. They asked me, did I give them my permission to cut the clothes? I said, cut whatever you want. And there you could have seen 5 bullet holes right across Philip's chest. And he was just like a rag doll. And his arms were flapping about everywhere.
He told his father he was dying. I said to him, I says, Damien, it's Mama. And his hand was so cold.
But the 2 boys died at the same spot in the road going into that Daisy House. And the ambulance driver said that they never knew that in their lives before. It was just as if they were contacting one another.
As news of the killing spread, shell-shocked villagers gathered in the street, scarcely able to believe what had happened in their midst.
We thought in Poyntzpass that we were God's own children because everybody was so well mixed. You know, and we never dreamt of it coming here.
Well, if you wanted to pick the one place in the north of Ireland where there weren't any tensions, where there was no sectarianism, where there was no history of paramilitarism, then it would have been Poyntzpass. And that's probably the reason that the evil minds who did this chose it, because they knew they would be able to drive in and drive out undetected. And they knew that when they went into that pub in Poyntzpass, they knew full well it was a mixed pub, and they knew they were going to be killing people of all persuasions.
It was unbelievable, the shock, and people were just in disbelief, couldn't believe what had happened. Because this is one of the quietest villages in the north of Ireland. I'm not saying we're unique in any shape or form, but we have got very good community relations down through the years.
These 2 men that were murdered last night, 2 friends across the community divide, in a sense symbolised the future in Northern Ireland. And those gunmen, in the evil atrocity that they committed, they symbolised the past. And we've now got to make progress in these talks, real progress. That should be our mission, so that the hopes of the future drive out the demons of the past.
Meanwhile, at Stormont, the province's politicians were locked in talks. The negotiations had reached a crucial stage.
It was at a point when things were beginning to coalesce. There were a number of balls still in the air, and it was just at that period of time where, the most difficult period actually, when you're trying to draw a conclusion on a number of issues which have been hanging about for, as they were then, for 3 years without getting to a conclusion.
The following day, the 2 MPs who would spearhead the new power-sharing executive staged an impromptu show of unity that seemed to symbolise the spirit of Poyntzpass.
We talked to people on the streets, and we talked to literally probably hundreds of people who were there covering it. In many ways it was fortuitous that we did meet at that period of time, but I think it was symbolically very potent that in the middle of the Good Friday discussions, almost at the end of those deliberations, that we were both able to make clear our position in relation to the awful violence which had taken place there.
As the village came to a standstill for a day of mourning, the police hunt for the killers was pressing ahead. There had been an early breakthrough. Before the shooting, David Keyes had been seen in a car matching the description of the getaway vehicle. Keyes was arrested and led police to the spot in Banbridge, where the guns used in the killings had been hidden, close to the clothes worn by the terrorists. Stephen McLean and Noel McCready and a 4th man, Ryan Robley, were arrested and later charged. A fortnight later, Keyes paid a heavy price for cooperating with the police.
David Keyes is driven from Newry Courthouse last Wednesday after appearing on a murder charge. Yesterday he was found dead in his cell in the Maze prison.
Less than a month later, politicians clinched the Good Friday Agreement. Contained within it was a deal on prisoners, which paved the way for hundreds of paramilitaries to walk free under the early release scheme run by the Sentence Review Commission. But today, 5 years on, a handful of prisoners who claim they meet the criteria for early release remain in jail. They include Neil Sheridan, jailed in 2001 for the INLA murder of RUC reservist Cyril Stewart in Armagh 3 weeks after Poyntzpass. Also Trevor McKeown, who was convicted of the murder of Catholic teenager Bernadette Martin as she lay in bed in Achillee in 1997. With McKeown on the wings in Maghaberry Prison are the Poyntzpass killers. Early releases became law as part of the Northern Ireland Sentences Act of 1998. At the time, the LVF was a specified group, meaning its prisoners, among them McLean and McCready, didn't qualify. But that was all to change. In May, just 2 months after Poyntzpass, the LVF called a ceasefire. In November, the government officially recognised the truce. In February 2000, McLean and McCready were sentenced to life for what the judge said was one of the most heinous offences in the history of Northern Ireland. The pair joked and laughed as the sentence was handed down, no doubt boosted by the belief they could be free in months.
Hard. It's hard. It was hard for everybody to see. We were only 3 seats sitting from them. And one in particular, McCready, he turned right around to see he was there. He was just like a bird. And you could see the real leaving and the snickering and laughing.
The first time I seen them was in Armagh. And I just could not believe that it was someone as young had done it and that it could be so evil. Them turning around and pointing and laughing to their own relatives and talking between themselves and laughing as if they were watching a television programme.
In fact, McLean and McCready were given a release date of July the 28th, 2000. Just weeks before, while on parole, the pair became involved in a vicious street fight among rival loyalists in Banbridge, which ended with their being charged with attempted murder. The then Secretary of State, Peter Mandelson, was outraged. He stepped in to challenge their early release. The Sentence Review Commission gave way and reversed their decision. As it turned out, McLean and McCready were cleared of all charges relating to the incident in Banbridge, but the commissioners still refused to release them, saying they couldn't be sure that the pair wouldn't pose a danger to the public. And in the meantime, the other man convicted of the Poyntzpass murders, Ryan Robley, had himself been released. Stephen McLean is now taking legal action in a bid to secure his freedom. He wants a judge to declare that his continued imprisonment is in fact unlawful. The case, which is being heard here at the High Court in Belfast, has thrown up all sorts of apparent contradictions. On the one hand, we have 2 men who killed for an organisation violently opposed to the Good Friday Agreement. They are now wanting release because of it. On the other, we have the same Sentence Review Commissioners who okayed the release of men like the Shankill bomber and Michael Stone. And they're saying that these 2 prisoners are just too dangerous to be released. And in another ironic twist, McLean and McCready turned for help to an outspoken critic of the whole early release programme, who raised their case with the authorities.
Well, I had been aware that a number of prisoners were still in jail. Certainly when any prisoner gets in touch with me, I'm usually fairly sceptical as to why they want to get in touch with a politician, especially a politician who's been so vehemently opposed to the position that they have taken. But I do believe that if you set aside the political emotions in this case and look at how the law has been applied, it has been applied in an unfair way. Whenever the government starts making examples of certain prisoners, it smacks of what they've done in the Irish Republic with the Garda McCabe issue, that there's a higher standard for people who have murdered Garda McCabe than there is for everyone else. Again, I stress my view that I don't think any of these prisoners ought to have got out. I campaigned on that basis. But once the government applies that law, they must apply it on a fair basis.
Alongside his court battle, McLean is waging a one-man campaign from behind bars. He makes telephone calls to canvass support and has written directly to the Secretary of State pleading his case. When he heard that Insight was making this programme, McLean issued the following statement.
I've made this statement as a reformed individual and not as a member of the Loyalist Volunteer Force or on behalf of that organisation. I am still in support of the peace process as outlined in the Good Friday Agreement, despite the fact that I remain in prison. I have renounced terrorism and severed all links and ties that I had with the LVF organisation, either inside or outside of prison. I genuinely regret my paramilitary past and recognise the futility of all terrorism, regardless of whatever corner it might emanate from. I would like to now publicly take this opportunity to unreservedly and sincerely apologise for my part in carrying out the atrocity at Poyntzpass, for which I am truly remorseful.
Wouldn't believe it at all. I don't think McLean has any remorse in him whatsoever.
In your view, what is a just sentence for them?
I think it would be safer maybe not saying that, to be honest with you.
Do you think life should mean life?
Yeah, or do unto them what they done unto you.
The Poyntzpass killers have gone through the same legal process as former UFF leader Johnny Adair when he applied for early release. Human rights groups are concerned about the format of a so-called private hearing, at which sensitive security information is aired.
The private hearing looks at so-called damaging information, which is being put forward as a reason for revoking the prisoner's licence. During that hearing, the prisoner cannot be present and the prisoner's legal representative cannot be present, but the Attorney General appoints a special advocate to represent the prisoner's interests. However, the special advocate is not allowed to consult with the prisoner or to discuss with him any of the issues brought to the damaging hearing. So we feel that it's unfair on the prisoner here. She doesn't get a proper opportunity to know what the case is against them, and therefore they can't answer the charges effectively.
But should the Human Rights Commission not be concentrating on the rights of victims' families rather than those of convicted killers?
Well, the position of the Human Rights Commission is that everybody in society has human rights. There are certain standards laid down internationally that we must apply. We must not have regard to the personalities of the particular individuals. We must instead have regard to the general standards and apply them across the board. If that means standing up for the rights of some very undesirable or nasty people, well, so be it, because the law says that everybody has human rights.
This is not about treating prisoners equally. This is about political point scoring and about using prisoners in a political gamble. And that's why it has been thoroughly wrong from day one to have included the whole issue of prisoner releases in any political deal. Because once you start messing about and interfering with the due process of law, the decisions of courts, how those decisions are applied in terms of jail sentences, you turn the judicial system on its head.
The Allen and Trainor families say it's a system of justice that has failed them in the past, and they have little faith it will deliver in the future.
If they do get out, they'll never get peace. And they'll do the same thing over again to somebody else.
Do you think they should get out?
No. I think anybody that does whatever they've done wrong, to keep them in there and let them do, I really think they should bring back hanging. What they're getting, they're in there now. They're lifting lead. I really do think hanging should be brought back.
So you really feel that any prison term that they got wasn't enough?
It wasn't enough.
I would be very disappointed if there's leniency shown towards those two people. Because they showed no leniency towards the two unfortunate people they shot, and more importantly to the families that they left behind. That you want to see broken homes and you want to watch what those two families have suffered over the years, and they're still suffering.
5 years on, more than 400 paramilitary prisoners have walked free early under the terms of the Sentences Act. Of those who've been released, only 34 have been charged with new offences or have had their licences revoked. The Sentence Review Commissioners have always acknowledged that their decisions by their very nature have been painful for the victims of violence. The justice debate has been reignited by the ongoing political negotiations surrounding so-called on-the-runs, terrorist suspects who've managed to avoid trial. Always keen to avoid controversy, the Commissioners declined to take part in this programme.
I think the political thinking behind the early release scheme was a recognition that prisoners would have to be released as part of a broader process of conflict resolution. Internationally and historically in Ireland, generally prisoners are released as part of a conflict resolution process, and I think from an early stage the political players recognised that reality. It certainly was a key issue for the political parties associated with the paramilitary groups, for Sinn Féin and the Loyalist parties, and I suspect that there would not have been a deal had we not have had provisions to secure the early release of the prisoners.
Pat Campbell's son Philip was shot dead by the UFF in 1992. She works closely with other victims' families and says they were deeply unhappy when the full details of the early release scheme emerged.
Well, we felt quite sad about it because we thought it was very premature for prisoners to be going to be let out when they had done some of them had done such a short time of their sentence, and like a lot of people said to me, like, our sentence doesn't end, ours goes on because we have been deprived of our loved ones. And we all did not think that surely that part of it was totally necessary.
I think it has achieved what it was meant to do. It brought the political parties who are associated with the paramilitaries into the process. It has been a success in that we've only had, I think, 30-odd prisoners who've been brought back into prison. Majority of them for ordinary related offences. So, in terms of its objective, which was to help secure the peace, yes, I think it has been a success.
Back in Poyntzpass, life has returned to as close to normal as possible, but the village will always be haunted by the events of the night of March 3rd, 1998. The Allen and Trainor families are still wrestling with their grief. They've little time to follow the legal wrangling surrounding the fate of the men who cut down their loved ones in cold blood. Whatever the killer's future, they say they are facing a life sentence.
You see him every day, you see the van, you see the lorry, you see him coming in, you see him at the front door. You see him with the clothes on and his boots. And he never was one for the house, he always loved out. I had left the clothes all ready for him in the morning, he'd been changing. He never gave you any bother. And Philip was so gentle.
You find it hard looking ahead. Because from Philip left the house to Philip was shot in the pub was 20 minutes. It's like everything else. All of us is looking peace. We know we have a price to pay for peace. But how long have we to pay the price for peace? Like, if Damien and Philip had been the last two and there'd been no more murders after that, well, that would have helped a lot. But not the way it's just carried on. And I really do think there's an element of people that doesn't want peace at any price.